Hi, welcome to Grandma's Story Time. I've decided, since all the boys and girls are home from school, that I'm going to do one of my favorite things, and that's read stories to children. I used to teach and now I'm retired, but I still love to read stories. In fact, I volunteer in a school, and that's my favorite thing to do when I go in to volunteer. Now, I thought during this time, what do people need more than anything? They need love. And the scripture verse in 1 Corinthians 13 says, "Now these three remain, faith, hope, and love, but the greatest of these is love." So I picked a Valentine's book to read because Valentine's Day is all about love. And this is one of my favorite stories. It's called Somebody Loves You, Mr. Hatch by Eileen Spinelli. Mr. Hatch was tall and thin, and he did not smile. Every morning at 6:30 sharp, he would leave his brick house and walk 8 blocks to the shoelace factory where he worked. At lunchtime, he would sit alone in the corner, eat his cheese and mustard sandwich, and drink a cup of coffee. Sometimes he would bring a prune for dessert. After work, he would make 2 stops: at the newsstand to get the paper, and at the grocery store to buy a fresh turkey wing for his supper. After supper, he read the paper and then took a shower and went to bed early. He keeps to himself. That's what everyone said about Mr. Hatch. One Saturday, when Mr. Hatch stepped onto his porch with his dustpan and broom, he got a surprise: a package wrapped in brown paper. He had never spoken to the postman before. "Thank you, Mr. Goober," he said. Mr. Goober smiled. "You're welcome. I always enjoy delivering packages." Mr. Hatch tore the brown paper off. Inside was a white box, which he opened to find another box. This one was heart-shaped, all satiny red with a pink bow on top. It was filled with candy. Something fluttered to the porch floor. It was a little white card. He picked it up. It said, "Somebody loves you." Only then did he remember it was Valentine's Day. Mr. Hatch wondered and wondered. Now, who would send this to me? He was all alone, he had no friends, and yet someone had sent him a Valentine. Who? He put the box on the table and tried to do some dusting, but every time he left the room, he kept peeking to see if the box was still there. He dusted and dusted, and the dust cloth seemed to whisper, "Somebody loves you, somebody loves you." At last, he flung the dust cloth away and exclaimed, "Why, I've got a secret admirer." And then he did something he had never done. He laughed, and he laughed, and he danced, and he clapped his hands. And he took a piece of candy from the box and ate it. Mr. Hatch changed his shirt and found some old aftershave in the bottom drawer. He splashed it on his face. He picked out a yellow tie with blue polka dots on it. And then he went for a walk. Maybe, he thought, I will meet the person who sent me the candy. Of course, no one had ever seen Mr. Hatch wearing a tie or smelling of aftershave or smiling, so he got a lot of attention. Mrs. Weed tripped over her dog. Mr. Dunwoody nearly fell off his ladder, and little Tina Finn spilled all the toys out of her wagon. Mr. Hatch waved hello to all of them. On Monday, it was back to work. At lunchtime, Mr. Hatch sat in the middle of the cafeteria. He spoke to everyone and passed out chocolates from his heart box. On the way home, as usual, he stopped at the newsstand. Mr. Smith handed him the usual newspaper. "I think I'll have a pack of mints," said Mr. Hatch, not as usual. Mr. Smith was shocked. "Was that you speaking, Mr. Hatch?" "Indeed it was," said Mr. Hatch. "And I would like to also have a pack of mints. And if you don't mind my saying so, Mr. Smith, you don't look very well." ill today. Mr. Smith recovered from his shock to reply, "You're right, I don't feel very well. I have a cold. I was supposed to go to the doctor's this afternoon, but the stand has been so busy I haven't had time." Mr. Hatch smiled. "Why, I'd be happy to watch the stand for you while you go." Mr. Smith could hardly believe his ears. "You would?" "Certainly, just show me what to do." And so Mr. Hatch ran the newsstand for an hour. He wondered if any of the women who stopped to buy a paper or a magazine or a candy bar had sent him the mysterious Valentine. When Mr. Smith returned, Mr. Hatch made his usual stop at the grocery store. "I'm a little tired of turkey wings," he told Mr. Todd. "I think I'll have a nice fresh slice of ham." Mr. Todd weighed the meat and wrapped it. "You look worried," said Mr. Hatch. "I am," said Mr. Todd. "My little girl is late. She hasn't come home from school yet, and I can't leave the store to look for her until my wife arrives." "Goodness, why didn't you say so?" said Mr. Hatch. "I will go look for her." And so he walked to the school and found little Melanie Todd by the swings and brought her home. "Oh, thank you," said the grocer. "Any time," said Mr. Hatch. After supper, Mr. Hatch did not bother to read the paper. He decided to bake brownies instead. It would be nice to have brownies to share the next day with the people at the shoelace factory. As he baked, the warm chocolate smell of brownies floated through the neighborhood. The children gathered round Mr. Hatch's house, sniffing the air. "Well, I suppose the factory can wait," said Mr. Hatch as he looked out the window, and he brought out 2 platefuls. "Now, what are brownies without lemonade?" he said, and he stirred up a nice pitcher of cold lemonade. When the parents came to gather their children, they had some brownies too. It turned out to be a picnic in Mr. Hatch's backyard. He dusted off an old harmonica and played songs he remembered from his boyhood. Everyone danced. And so the days and weeks went by. When Mr. Hatch wasn't smiling, he was laughing. And when he wasn't laughing, he was helping someone. And when he wasn't helping someone, he was having a party in his yard or on his porch. He seemed to have forgotten all about the person who sent him the Valentine. Then, one afternoon, Mr. Goober, the postman, came to his door. His face was serious. "Come in, Mr. Goober," said Mr. Hatch. "You look upset." "I am upset," he said. "I made a mistake some time ago. My supervisor is very angry with me." Do you? Yes, Mr. Goober, what is it? "Do you recall the package I delivered to you on Valentine's Day, I think it was?" "Yes, I believe so," replied Mr. Hatch, beginning to feel a little uneasy. "I don't suppose you still have it," said Mr. Goober sadly. "As a matter of fact," said Mr. Hatch, "I still have the box. The candy is gone, though. Why do you ask?" The postman took a deep breath. "I'm afraid I delivered it to the wrong address. It was supposed to go to another house." Mr. Hatch recalled tearing off the brown paper. It had never occurred to him to look at the address. He fetched the heart-shaped box and the pink bow and gave them to the postman. "I do hope your supervisor won't be too angry with you now." The postman was heading down the sidewalk when Mr. Hatch called from his porch. "Oh, Mr. Goober, I forgot something." He gave the postman the little white card that said, "Somebody loves you." All alone in his living room, Mr. Hatch sighed. "Nobody loves me after all." He read the paper, took his shower, and went to bed early. The next morning at 6:30 sharp, Mr. Hatch left his brick house and walked 8 blocks to the shoelace factory. At lunchtime, he sat in the corner by himself, ate his cheese and mustard sandwich, and drank a cup of coffee. After work, he stopped at the newsstand for his paper, but he did not speak to Mr. Smith. And when he ordered his turkey wing from Mr. Todd, he did not smile, nor did he pat little Melody Todd on the head, or bake brownies, or have picnics, or parties, or play his old harmonica anymore. Everyone whispered, "What's wrong with Mr. Hatch?" Mr. Goober, the postman, told them. "We love Mr. Hatch," insisted Mr. and Mrs. Dunwoody. "He gave us flowers for our garden, and he helped me mend my back fence." Mrs. Weed nodded. "I love him too. He saved his bones for my dog Ruffy." Ruffy barked. She loved Mr. Hatch too. Mr. Smith told everyone how Mr. Hatch had watched his newsstand so that he could go visit the doctor. And Mr. Todd told everyone how Mr. Hatch had found his little girl. All of the children in the neighborhood remembered Mr. Hatch's wonderful brownies and lemonade, and most of all his laughter. "Poor Mr. Hatch," they said. "What can we do?" Then Mr. Goober announced, "I have an idea." On Saturday morning, Mr. Hatch woke to a bright and sunny day. He put on his old overalls and went out to his porch with his dustpan and broom. He couldn't believe his eyes. All over the porch were red and white hearts and pink bows. There were boxes of candy on the chairs and yellow streamers flowing from the ceiling, and sticking out of his mailbox was a shining silver harmonica. The front yard was filled with people, happy, smiling people, and they were holding up a huge sign with hand-painted letters. It said, "Everybody loves Mr. Hatch." Mr. Hatch dabbed a tear with his handkerchief. "I do believe," he sniffed, "somebody loves me after all." And then he smiled, and then he laughed, and then he hurried down to be with his friends. Now, I love this story because it shows what a difference love can make, and how different Mr. Hatch acted once he realized how much he was loved. And so I think during this time of the coronavirus, when so many people are afraid and have to be all alone because they can't go out for whatever reason, I can't even go over and hug my grandchildren. And so I think a really good thing to do to cheer people up and change how they feel, just like love changed Mr. Hatch, is to send them some love. And I have a very special way you can send love to someone that you can't go over and give a hug to like you normally do, or even someone who lives far away. You can send them your love in the mail. You can send a very special hug that you can make, and I'm going to show you how to make this hug and send it. Now, this is a really special hug because I made it with toilet paper. Now, I don't normally use toilet paper when I make one of these hugs because I've done this before, but because toilet paper right now is such a treasure, it'll make this even a more special hug if you use it. And the way I knew just how much toilet paper to use was I measured my hug. And my hug is this size exactly. I stretched out my arms, and then I cut out my hands with just some regular white paper. And so I made it so it would be just like the same size as a hug from me. And I'm going to send this hug to my friend Barb. Now Barb, I'm going to put it in this envelope. Barb lives in an adult family home. She used to be my next door neighbor, and she's still my very good friend, but she can no longer have visitors. And so I can't go over and give her a hug. So I'm going to send her one in the mail, and you can do the same thing. Now, before I traced my hands, all you'll need is just one piece of paper, just your regular size paper. I folded it in half so that I could cut out both my hands at the same time, some glue, or you could use tape, and scissors, and of course a pen, and your envelope. Now I'm even, when I seal this, put my hug inside and I seal it, I'm going to use a sponge just in case there are germs, and I don't think germs are going to live that long on this, but I'm careful. So I decided I would trace my hands, and then as you can see, I cut it out, folded the paper, and I even have room left for this little heart to cut out. You cut it out on the fold, just make like a little, looks like a half of ice cream cone, and you trace that in that corner. And my hands are kind of big, so you'll have plenty of room. Or you can trace your hands one at a time, however you want to do it. But after I did this, I decided, well, I might as well embellish it a little and put rings and paint my fingernails. Now, embellish just is a big word that means make it fancier or add details. And so I did the same thing with this little heart. I found pink, so I made my heart pink. And I put some decorations around the edge, and then I wrote a little poem, and my poem says, I made this hug for you to cheer you when you're blue because I love you. And you can say whatever you want on your heart. You could say, God loves you and I love you too, or I miss you. I wish I could give you this hug in person, but this is a hug. Whatever you want to say. You could even write a little letter with it if you wanted to. And then you're just going to fold it up. It's easy to just fold it up. Now, I'll probably have to fold my hands a little too once I fold it up and put it in the envelope, but I'm going to fold it and then I'm going to send it to my friend Barb, and she's going to be so happy to get a hug from me. And that's all you need to do. Now, I hope you enjoyed the story. I hope you will reach out and share your love with somebody, because love does indeed make a difference. And the next story that I will read another time will be The Dragon Snatcher. And this story is an exciting story, but it also shows what a difference love can make. So until next time, boys and girls and moms and dads and everybody out there, I hope you will spread your love and maybe even make a video of yourself sending love to somebody. It's easy to do. If I can do it, anybody can. Bye.